Hello and welcome to the Jackcast, your Swansea City podcast. I'm going to start that again, actually.
That was a cracking start.
Hello and welcome to the Jackcast, your Swansea City podcast. I'm hosting this week, Steve Carroll. Unfortunately, Matt is otherwise engaged, so he's not with us tonight. But don't worry, I'm not on my own. You won't have to listen to me for however long. An old friend of ours has joined us again, Ian Mitchelmore. Thank you very much for your time, Ian. How are you?
Good evening, Steve. Yeah, thanks for having me on as always. Shame Matt can't join us, but yeah, we're going to have to do some heavy lifting tonight. So yeah, hope you're all good, Steve. Thanks for having me on again.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you, because without you, then it would just be me, and I can't think of anything worse. We probably have zero viewing figures, or listening figures, I should say. But so it's going to be more of an end of season review pod tonight, because obviously the season has now ended. I don't think anyone's too devastated about that. But before we start, I will reveal that I have had a one-on-one with Andy Coleman in the last week. It is essentially an off-the-record conversation, so I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of it. But all I can really say is that all the questions that I had, I was given answers to. I think the proof will be in the pudding, as ever, with a lot of them. But thank you to him for giving his time. I would say to anybody, really, if you want to have a conversation with him, put your name down, and I'm sure at some point they will get around to you. I think they have been quite popular by the sounds of it, and I think they've increased the time of each slot as well, because I think a lot of them were overrunning. But I would say to anyone, really, you've got concerns, which many of us have. You would have heard a lot of mine on the podcast this season. Just go and have a conversation with him and express your thoughts and see where it gets you, really. So, we'll move on now to we'll start briefly, I think, with the Millwall game. Mitch, you were at the game. You haven't been at a huge amount of games, I know, this season, but more recently you've been at a few. Not a classic to end the season, was it? It was a typical end of season affair, quite lacklustre, uninspiring, and of course it ended with a poor result as well, didn't it?
Yeah, 100%, Steve. In many ways, I think a lot of people thought that it kind of summed up the season. Just to come on to your chat with Andy Coleman, obviously we've had a chat about this in terms of what went on and stuff, but it's brilliant that first and foremost he does it and that the club do it. They want to be open and as transparent as possible. So the fact that they do it, I think, is really, really good, and it's great that you've been able to go and get involved in that. And like you say, you just want the actions now to be on the pitch and off the pitch, and you want to see these words, not just hear them. So it's a good start. So I just wanted to acknowledge that first. But yeah, coming back to the Millwall game, I mean, it was just a bit flat, wasn't it? It was a gorgeous sunny day, and you kind of think, can we end on a high after what has been a good little run and an end to the season where things are sort of slowly improving under Luke Williams. And yeah, it was just really, really flat, and that to miss the penalty and then to concede soon after from Ronaldo probably in pre-season mode doing what he was doing and then conceding like that. It was just a bit of a shame. Luckily, there was nothing riding on it. But yeah, I think the general consensus was that it kind of summed up the season, really, wasn't it, Steve?
Yeah, I think it did, really. To be fair, we've picked up the last few weeks. I mean, I go back to the Middlesbrough game where we looked like we were on the beach, really, from my point of view. And Williams read the riot act. And since then, obviously, we had a good win over Stoke. Probably not a great one over Rotherham, but nevertheless, we got 3 points. I mean, not everyone got that. One team I know conceded 5 to them on the final day, but we won't go into that too much. Obviously, we had a good win at Huddersfield, 4-0. And then, to be fair, we've played well at Norwich and got a draw against, probably the best side that we've faced for a while, which I would say was quite encouraging, because that was probably more of a truer test of where we are. And you can definitely see that we have improved in recent weeks, but unfortunately we didn't end on a high, really. But I think from my point of view, looking at it, we finished 14th in the end. I feel like it maybe flatters us slightly, but at the same time, I think considering the position that Swansea have been in for a lot of the season, and obviously the tough start that Luke Williams had with a lot of fixtures, I think it's not been a bad overall finish, has it, Mitch? I don't think.
No, not at all. Considering, when you're talking about a season where you've sacked the manager for the first time mid-season since Paul Clement, the last year in the Premier League in 17-18, and you've had a caretaker manager in charge for a month, and not just a month, December, when things are incredibly busy and you're going into a transfer window, to finish, well clear of the bottom three in the end it's most clubs would have given for that. You're looking at even Birmingham, Huddersfield, certainly Birmingham, where they were at the start of the season, they wouldn't have seen what their situation was unfolding. Plymouth, they had a good start, didn't they? But ultimately maybe the lack of quality there sort of dragged them into it and stuff as well, and they did brilliantly to avoid going down. But yeah, to be comfortably clear as with 5 or 6 games to spare, whatever it was, I think it was after the Stoke game where it was pretty much done, wasn't it? Anybody would have taken, after what was on the whole a really grim season after a couple of seasons of building, and then the 2 seasons before that under Steve Cooper where they were playoffs, and then the year before that under Graham Potter where it was a total revamp and bringing through all the academy boys. So it's the worst season really since the early, well before the Premier League, unless you include that relegation season, really, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, I called it the most unenjoyable season since 2002-03, where we finished 21st in the Football League and needed a win on the final day to stay up. And that says a lot. I think it's because ever since that moment, there was like an upward trajectory, really, where if we weren't, if we didn't go up, we were quite often in at least the top 10 until we got to the Premier League. But then you're in the Premier League, so you're doing well anyway. And I think there's just, from my point of view, there's been more of a disconnect, I think, as well, between the club and the fans. I'd say a lot of the players this year and haven't been particularly popular either, if you know what I mean. I think previously there's probably been a closer relationship between the players and the fans, if that makes sense. Whereas I think a lot of the ones that have come in this year have not really hit the ground running. And I think I'm sure we'll come on to it with players that have been on loan, out of contract, etc. But I don't think many Swansea fans would be sorry to see the back of a lot of these players, if you know what I mean. And I think that says a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's the weird part. You look, this time last season, you were talking about Russell Martin. Is he getting a new contract? Ryan Manning, Kyle Norton, Joel Latibodiere. I know he wasn't everyone's cup of tea, but still, he contributed in some ways. And again, I'm not going to say too much because I know you weren't his biggest fan, but Ryan Manning was certainly a player people wanted to stay and everything as well. And where's the clamour for these players to stay? Like you said, the loan players. Is anybody really going to miss many of them? Maybe Jamal Lowe. I think he's contributed fairly well in what's been a disjointed team that's caught in between styles this season. And I think that's probably been one of the key factors, because let's take, say, Josh Tymon as a prime example. He's come in from another championship club, so he's established at this level. And he found the going tough in the first few months. He's even said it himself in an interview, I think, when Luke Williams arrived. And for me, since January, he's probably been Swansea's best player. With the form he's been in, his attacking outlets, he's been great. But defensively, he's fantastic as well. I actually think he's a better defender than Ryan Manning was. So, but yeah, I just think it comes back to that original point where there's this sort of thing made about them being an unlikable squad. I personally think that's quite unfair, but I just think it's because they've been caught in between styles and they've not played this sort of style of football that Swansea fans generally want and have seen over the last 15, 20 years, or the last 50 years if you listen to Michael Duff or whatever it was he said. But it just sums it up really, when there's not like a clamour for these players who are out of contract or the loan players to be staying, which in years gone by has always been a key issue, really, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It feels like certainly since Williams has come in, there's been far more of like a settled side. But I think the players that have not been playing in general, they're probably the ones that people don't like. And you think of a lot of those loan players. I know Patino started the final game of the season, for example, and so did Humphreys. But they've barely featured, have they, at all in recent months. Ashby has disappeared off the face of the earth, for example. And there's no doubt whatsoever that they're all going to go back to their parent clubs. And Lowe, I think, is someone that everyone's a bit more on the fence with. I think in the right circumstances he could end up staying, but I think he's going to want more money or a better deal than maybe what's going to be on the table. So I could see a situation with him where if he was to stay, it will drag out a little bit, and you'll maybe wait and see what else is on the table first. But the obvious one, Mitch, is Rushworth, though, isn't it? I think if Swansea could keep him, that would be huge, because it goes without saying how good he's been this season, really. And I'm a broken record, but if he wasn't in goal this season, then a different goalkeeper was. I think the outcome might have been different.
Yeah, I know what you mean, and obviously that's become another dilemma to solve now. But on Carl Rushworth, he's made his mistakes this season. Southampton away and a couple of other scary moments. But again, it's been tough when he's not had a settled back four or back five, and not a settled manager, not a settled style of play. And yet he's come through that and still been the player of the season. And not just in my opinion, but in the eyes of the fans really as well. So that'd be a real coup if they could get him back. And that while there's people like Martin Margetson there, there's always hope that can happen. So I think, judging by the interview he gave with the media, was it 2 weeks ago, I think, before the last game or whenever it was, that he's enjoyed his time here and would certainly be open to coming back. You can see the way that the fans were chanting his name in the Millwall game and singing YJB towards him as well, and he acknowledged them, and he's clearly enjoyed his time here, even though it's not been good on the pitch. But ultimately, when you're a loan player from the Premier League, it's not about winning trophies and promotions. It's about developing and making sure you go back into the Premier League a better player, which, let's be honest, he will do. And if he does another season, I think he's really going to benefit from it. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think from my point of view that he needs to play, doesn't he? I mean, he's had a good career so far in the lower divisions. I think he had a year at Walsall in League Two. He was at Lincoln last year, League One. Now he's made the step up to the Championship. I mean, I think for him to get first team football in the Premier League at this moment in time would be quite challenging. But I mean, maybe he's looking at, or Brighton, should I say, a loan for a side maybe towards the top end of this division. But I mean, I think regardless of what happens, he needs to be playing next year. So I still think it would be, selfishly, of course, that it would be a good move for him to come back here. But I mean, we'll wait and see, won't we? But I mean, it's quite damning, though, isn't it? Of the 6 players on loan, we're praising one of them. We're saying one's okay, and nobody else really had much of an impact in it. But the strange thing is, I mean, you look at the likes of Patino and Humphreys in particular, they were quite highly rated, weren't they? And I think their spells in particular are going to be big disappointments, haven't they?
Yeah, and it's a strange one because we haven't even mentioned Charles Segoe Jr. So there we are. I don't even know if anyone knows he's still been at the club or not. But that's just one of those that just didn't work out for whatever reason. He was obviously brought in as cover. Charlie Patino, there's no doubt he's got immense ability, but I just think there's big question marks about his work off the ball. And I think that was an issue at Blackpool as well. On the ball, you can see it. He's got lots of quality, but obviously he's quite slight. He's not very physical. He gets bullied quite easily, and he's still a young player, so he's going to develop. But there's no doubt he's got lots of talent. But yeah, there's work to be done with him. But Bashir Humphreys, I'm quite gutted it didn't work out for him, because you can tell that he's a very, very talented player, and I've got a feeling he's going to go somewhere else. He's going to look more settled. He's going to play more, and he's going to look really, really good. Because he did have games at the start of the season where I thought he was really top, but then there's a couple of other ones, maybe like Leeds away towards the back end of the Michael Duff era, where he struggled, and then obviously he's never really had a look in under Luke Williams. So it's that one's more unfortunate, I think. And then Harrison Ashby, coming from a Premier League club, you expect a lot more. And obviously I know he's had injuries as well, but that's just been a major disappointment, hasn't it? So it's quite rare when you get that many Premier League players who are ready probably for Championship football, that so many of them don't work out, aside from Carl Rushworth. Whereas you look at Steve Cooper, who was bringing in Rhian Brewster, excelled. Mark Gurhey, excelled. Freddie Woodman, excelled. Conor Gallagher, okay, not as at the level he is now, but he still contributed in many ways as well. So yeah, it's just been a poor season of recruitment, and I think last summer the knock-on effect of that summer is going to take a couple of years. I listened to the Overlap podcast with Gary Neville very regularly, and he was talking recently about his time at Salford, where they get one managerial appointment wrong and it has such a major knock-on effect on the club financially, on the players, the recruitment, the style. And he said that they were suffering for a couple of years from one bad appointment, and I've just got a horrible feeling that the Swansea are going to have a lasting effect from last summer. And you just hope that they can try to just stay financially stable, keep a competitive squad on the pitch, and at least have some sort of challenge for the top 6 this next season under Luke Williams, and just let him build over a couple of seasons. But yeah, it's not going to be easy after last summer, I don't think, Steve.
No, I don't think so at all either. I mean, it's interesting what you say there about building, because I've always believed, really, from my point of view, that you should always try and appoint managers with a similar philosophy, really, because then you don't end up having to make wholesale changes to your squad. And that was one of the key reasons, I think, why Swansea were successful and went through the divisions, and why Michael Duff didn't work, I think, was partly along those lines as well, because you then end up with a mixture of players, and whereas if Luke Williams had maybe come in at the start of last summer, then we wouldn't have made some of the signings that we made. Some different players would have come in, and we would have built on what was, to be fair, a good end to last season, where we did narrowly end up missing out on the playoffs, really. So I think there's a key lesson in there to be learned, really, isn't there? That if they'd made a better appointment, someone that and sometimes appointments can just go wrong anyway. I mean, you look at Brendan Rodgers as a funny one. Got fired by Reading, didn't he? And it seemed like a good appointment on the face of it. And then the irony is that we end up beating him in the playoff final, and he's our manager by this point. So, you do get him where they don't work. But I think Duff, for example, was never realistically going to work down here. And I think that they've learned a harsh lesson with it. And luckily, Luke Williams has come in and they can repair the damage, I think. But at the same time, like you say, it's going to take time, isn't it? I mean, if we look at some of the players now that are out of contract, I mean, what do you think is going to happen there? I mean, do you think Joe Allen, should we start with him? Do you think he's going to stay? I mean, I'd like to think that he would. Obviously, there's been fitness issues there, so that is a concern. I think if he was fit, he'd be in the team every week and he'd be making a difference. But, I mean, there is that nagging doubt, isn't there, over how many games he can play, aren't there?
Yeah, and it's such a shame with Joe, because he came back with, there was good expectation. He's coming back home, be with his family, and he could still contribute. And the hope is that he'd be fit and go and play at a World Cup with Wales. And in the end, it's just not panned out that way. He was injured going into that tournament, couldn't deliver his best form. Struggled since coming back at Swansea. And I just feel really sorry for him, because it's not panned out. But when he does play, you see the quality he's got. So I'd like to think that there's scope for another year there for him, because he's made his money at Liverpool and Stoke in the Premier League, and obviously Swans as well. So it's certainly not going to be financially driven from him. He's home. I think he'd be happy to have another season down here. Realistically, where would he go? I mean, I know he's had interest from Spain over the last few years. But is that something he'd look to explore? Maybe, I don't know, but I'd imagine the club would want to keep him. Whether it happens, I suppose it's going to come down to maybe finances, and realistically, do they think, are they going to get somebody else for somebody of better quality who knows the club and that's going to be cheaper? So there's a lot of things to weigh up, isn't there? But I wouldn't be surprised if he stayed, because I think the club would want him to. But like I say, as long as he can stay fit, there's every chance that he might go. He might fancy himself abroad at some point.
Yeah, maybe he will. But my thoughts on him were more that once he came back to Swansea, that would be his last club, really. I mean, he'd be basically coming home to retire. I mean, but you do never know. It depends on, he may be in a position now where the contract he's offered, if there is one, that's not good enough, and he decides to change his plans. But I'm assuming his preference would be to remain here at this moment. I mean, I think Liam Walsh will get released, is my instinct, because we can't surely keep Joe and him because, of his injury record. I think Walsh can offer something when he is fit, but it just feels like I was looking back through his career stats before, and I think the most games he's ever played in a season is 25, and I mean, it's just nowhere near enough, really, is it? I do feel sorry for him, because it must be nothing worse than being injured all the time, but I mean, he's not going to get another contract, is he, surely?
I wouldn't have thought so. And again, like you said, it is such a shame, because he's a really talented player, and he can fill a couple of different positions in the middle as well. So, we've not really seen goals, but I think his only 2 Swansea goals have come this season. The Huddersfield one, which was just a beautiful finish. Was it Coventry away, the other one as well, I think? So, he's a really, really, really nice player. If he was fully fit, I think he'd have been perfect for Luke Williams, and probably for Russell Martin as well. But it's just not worked out. And the fact that his record injury-wise is as bad as it is, and it was before Swansea as well. So I think that's got to be a big red flag. So yeah, I'd be very, very surprised if he did stay on. Yeah,
Jamie Patterson. I think this time last year, everyone would have assumed that there was no way that he'd be staying here, but he's a funny one, isn't he? Because he's been one of our better players this year. He's been quite key, I wouldn't say, in terms of offering goals and assists. And even though he is getting on a little bit now, from my point of view, I think he does deserve another season, really. But I suppose you never know entirely what you're going to get with him, do you?
That's the thing. Yeah, I think if they could get financially, if it all made sense, I think another year would be great. Because for me, I think he's been the most consistent outfield player of the season. I think he's actually gone up a level compared to where he was last year. Because obviously, when he first came in under Russell Martin, I thought he was excellent for 4 or 5 months before that contract situation, and he never looked like the same player after that, really. But on the whole,
he went 18 months without a goal, didn't he?
Exactly, yeah. So, which was strange because didn't he score something like 8 or 9 in that first?
Yeah,
first
it was
half,
8 in the first half of the season, which even by a striker standard, that was that's a good return. But for someone that's playing as a 10, it's quite exceptional, really, wasn't it?
Exactly, and that's the thing. So he's clearly got the talent and the ability there, and I thought his work rate this season was really it stood out for me. It's just whether if he's still got that hunger, desire, and he thinks, well, can I help this team try and step up a level and get back towards that, to close the gap to the top 6. You're chucking him, Grimes, Fulton, those sort of more experienced players in there now. And if that's the case, I think it would make sense. But it's just whether they think now, okay, it's time to move on. You've had your time here. You've had your new contract. You've seen it out, and it's time to invest in maybe players for the future and develop more assets. Because let's be honest, he's not an asset anymore, is he? So, but you do need experience as well. So it's a tricky balance, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think, to right the wrongs of last year in terms of the transfer market as well, I don't really think you can correct everything in one go. So from my point of view, be looking and thinking there'll be other key positions where we really need to strengthen, and you might not be able to afford to do all the business you really want to do. So I'd be looking from a point of view of where we can keep Patterson. There'd be no transfer fee, obviously. The wages will probably be similar to what they have been this season. And I think that would be, quite sensible then in terms of, maybe looking in a year's time where, depending on how he gets on it, that we might then need to phase him out or obviously let him go completely. So, I think you certainly have to bear that in mind of we will have to do some business in the summer, and you can't always do everything that you want to in one go, really. Carl Norton's another one. I thought he would retire was my instinct, but, we haven't heard a lot yet. And I think if he was going to retire, then usually you get an announcement, don't you, before the final game. So he gets a little bit of a send-off, but that hasn't happened. I think there's going to be a struggle now for us to find room for him, because I think Josh Key obviously is his first choice, and then I think Sam Parker will return. I know there's speculation, he rejected a contract, could potentially go elsewhere, but it's going to be difficult for Norton to really find any game time, I would have thought, next year. And he probably won't be cheap as an experienced player, but I get the impression maybe he'll be staying. I don't know what you're thinking.
Yeah, he's a tricky one, and I think this comes back to what you were saying about you can't do all your business in one summer when you've got pros like him who, I know he's not a young man anymore, but in football terms, but he can fill in when you need him. For me, he's no longer a starter and hasn't been for a number of years. And like you say, when Josh Key's back, the left side's covered. He's not a central defender. There's no place for him in the team anymore, but there's a place for him in the squad and the club, I think. And you can't underestimate that. And I know you can't be you sentimental about these things, but they're not going to. Swansea aren't going to get rid of 15 players this summer and bring 15 in. They're not going to be able to, because who realistically is going to want to take X, Y, and Z off their hands? Some of the players that didn't work out this season, some of them might go, but they're not all going to go. That naturally means you can't then go and bring in the 1 or 2 strikers you wanted, because you've already got 1 or 2 on your books. So he might fall into that bracket, and Jamie Patterson similar. So I must admit, I'm a little bit torn on Callum Norton. I really don't know. I feel like there's a place for him, but I also feel like in an ideal world, it's time to move on and he can go and do his own thing, whether that's going to coaching or retirement or whatever. But sadly, the world isn't ideal. So I don't know is the long and short answer.
Yeah, that's fair. I think he'll stay, but I think I would. The way I would look at it for Callum Norton would be, his last kicker for football, he was injured and he still made sure he put the ball out against Cardiff. So, he'll be remembered a hero. So I don't think it'd be a bad time to step away.
Yeah, and that's the thing, that those sort of moments, you need that in a dressing room in a team that's struggling and fighting. So, even if he just moves into a different role within the club, I think that might have been discussed at some point in the last year or two, whether he decides to move back up north somewhere. But yeah, it's whatever happens with him, he's been a tremendous servant, obviously back in the Premier League as well. So full credit to him for what's been a fantastic career, if it is done,
Yeah, absolutely. Whether he retires or not, he still had a very good career, and he's been here for a long time now. It'll be 10 years coming up next January, so one of the longest serving players then. So I think the other player that's out of contract really is Plaqueta, the winger we signed from Norwich. I mean, he's had a good impact. Obviously been injured over the last few weeks, really. A bit of a gamble, really, when we brought him in. He'd not really featured much for the Canaries, but I mean, he'd done quite well for us. I mean, again, I think we look at this situation of, can you do all your business in one go? And I mean, would he be a starter for us next year? I mean, maybe. I think it's not a guarantee, I don't think. And obviously, Josh Ginnelly will hopefully come back. That'll give us that bit more width and pace as well, another option, which is good. But I mean, I think I would, on the right terms, give him, offer him another year, maybe even a year plus an appearance bonus that leads to a second one. I mean, I think he has had quite a good impact for us, but it would probably depend again on wages. I wouldn't break the bank to sign him. But what do you make of him in his short career at Swansea so far?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I think it the way they structured that deal, it made perfect sense. It just gave him that sort of short-term chance to prove himself. He also, he helped. He added some pace. I thought him and Ronaldo coming in, it really changed the dynamic of the team, because there wasn't much pace in that team previously, and Jamal Lowe's not that kind of player. Josh Ginnelly was, but obviously we've not seen him all season, unfortunately for him. So obviously him coming back next year with Ronaldo as another wide option with a bit of pace and can beat a man, I think that's going to change the dynamic. And yeah, as much as there was a lot to like about Plaqueta, I just can't quite see that one making financial sense. Not that he's going to be asking for the earth. I wouldn't have thought he would have been, but yeah, I think that ship might have sailed on him, to be honest. I think I would be surprised if that was made permanent, unless maybe they were scrambling towards the back end of the market and the season was starting and they were sort of in need of options. Maybe they would reassess it, but yeah, in a perfect scenario and as things stand as of sort of today, a week after the season, I'll be honest, I don't see that one happening.
Well, you could be right. I mean, it's all gone very quiet, isn't it? So yeah, we'll have to watch this space. I'm sure we'll get an announcement soon on a lot of these players. I mean, obviously the season that has ended, a lot of clubs have put up their retain list. So by the time you listen to this, there could well be some information on that, and hopefully there is, so we can look forward and we'll know what positions we need to strengthen. But I mean, Mitch, there's a lot of players still under contract here, so I feel like we should really go through position-wise. I mean, what we think could happen. I mean, we've touched on Carl Rushworth. I mean, it's no secret how I feel about Andy Fisher. He's got another year left in his contract. I mean, but for a start, there's no way he can play. And I mean, I would get rid of him. And we've also got Nathan Broom here. I mean, but you'd expect the goalkeeper to come in, wouldn't you, either way, regardless of if either of those were to go. I mean, I don't think either of them are going to be first choice next year, are they?
Yeah, I think a goalkeeper's a certainty. Whether it's, I think Carl Rushworth is certainly being explored. Whether it happens, who knows? But yeah, there'll be a new goalkeeper in the summer, 100%. I'd be surprised if Andy Fisher was first choice next season. Look, in some unfortunate world, if they couldn't get the business done early, there's every chance that he might start the season. I'd be surprised if that happened as well. But I'd like to think that they get that done well before then. But even if he did start the season, I still think somebody would come in. But I think that's unlikely. But yeah, that's one of the key issues. I think Carl Rushworth would be great. Like I say, he's had a full season to bed in, and he knows what the style is going to be next year. And it's going to be a continuation of what they've done for the last 5-6 months under Luke Williams. So it makes sense, even if it's not him, somebody of that ilk. So, yeah, I think that's quite a straightforward one. There's going to be one coming in, I'd have thought. Yeah, I mean, for me, that is the top priority. We'll have to bring a goalkeeper in if Rushworth doesn't come in. I mean, we've mentioned the right-back situation. I mean, centre-back, I could see something happening there. I mean, Nathan Wood had his option triggered, didn't he? He didn't feature on the final day of the season. I mean, my instinct is that he might go, but I think also Cabango and Darlin are both in situations now where they've only got a year left on their contract. So, I mean, I think Swansea are going to need to look at that, really, aren't they? I mean, there's going to be a problem there otherwise. Yeah, 100%. And this is where the loan market, it's so important, isn't it? Look at Mark Gurhey when he came in, and he played the majority of the games in his second spell. Obviously, I know he had a tricky start to his first one, but if you are going to utilise that market, you've got to make sure what are they being brought in for, So, yeah, Cabango and Darling, I think that they could be the first choice next season because, like you say, there's a lot of noise around Nathan Wood. I was surprised he didn't play in the last game of the season. It felt a little bit telling, and he's definitely going to have interest. I wouldn't be surprised if Southampton are one of those that take a look at him again. But
might depend more legal range.
100%, yeah, and that's the key question. So, but in terms of him, he's an England under-21 international, and I know there's been times where fans are divided on him this season. And I understand it because he's been consistent, and but again, I think in terms of talent and what he could do under the right coach, I think his ceiling is really, really high. I think he's a Premier League player, but he just hasn't shown it consistently, and he's still incredibly young as well. So, yeah, he should have been a bigger asset than he's going to be for Swansea, and that's the sad part because, yeah, he should have been another Flynn Downs going for big money or a Joel Pirro going for a good sum, and sadly, because of the way it's been handled, that's not going to happen now. But, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he was still here next season, but at the same time, I think this is probably the last chance to cash in, and realistically, how many assets are there that are in this squad at the moment? He's probably the pick of the bunch, isn't he?
Yeah, I think so. I think they'll certainly want to let him go, and there is issues there in terms of, as I've said, the other two being only having a year left on contracts as well. So, a centre half is likely to come in. That would be my prediction. I mean, we've talked about Tymon. I mean, obviously had a really good season. It's very difficult to think he won't be left back next season. But I mean, is someone else possibly going to come in? I mean, there's obviously Nathan Jawa on, if that's how you say it. I still don't know how to say it. But and there's also Christian Pedersen, obviously, which has been. That's how you say it, is it? Chuo.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So then there's him and Pedersen, isn't there? And I mean, that's been a disastrous signing. I think on a free transfer, but a lot of money. And I mean, I don't think either of those two are going to have a future year, are they?
Again, it comes back to this. In an ideal world, you'd say no, because obviously they were just, the signings haven't worked out. Philip Lisser, I think he's one that's an exciting prospect, defensive player. Did he get Academy Player of the Season?
I think was it a tied one? I think, but I was surprised that he didn't play instead of Humphreys in the final game, to be honest.
Exactly. So I think he's one that's probably, if you're looking for a player without having to make an extra signing, or if it comes between the toss up of getting a striker and bringing another defender in, well, if you're putting your funds towards a forward player or something, well, you've got him as an option there to come in and be a squad player and suddenly contribute. So I think next year could be the one where we do see him, and if not, I think he needs a loan to play because he's at that stage now. But you speak to everyone at the academy about him, and he's the next one off the ranks. He's the current hot talent there. As much as we saw brief glimpses of Sam Parker, who knows what's going to happen with his future in terms of the contract situation. But he's clearly a talent. But yeah, Philip Lisser is probably one that I think we could potentially see a bit more of.
Well, let's hope so. I mean, because that is going to be a position that we need to strengthen. So if he was to show something, I mean, he might be able to get a chance in the League Cup game early on, and it'll go from there type of thing. But that would be a big help. Move into midfield. Obviously, I think it's obvious that Matt Grimes' place in the team is pretty secure. I mean, remarkable again that he's played every minute of every game. I think Jay Fulton's got his critics, obviously. I mean, but I don't think he's going to go anywhere. We've mentioned Joe Allen may stay. I mean, there's Azim Abdullahi, obviously, but I think we might see a midfield player come in. Maybe one that could well be a starter as well, because, as we've said, Joe's had his injury problems. If he does stay, can't really rely on him. I mean, I don't know if Fulton is necessarily the manager's first pick, because, I mean, he's certainly not when Joe Allen's fit. So do you think there could be a central midfield player come in? I mean, my instinct is that there will be.
Yeah, you'd imagine so. Like you said, Walsh probably unlikely to stay. We don't know what's going to happen with Patterson. I appreciate he's a little bit more of an attacking player, not a central midfielder. And then obviously Patino didn't really work out. And then again, Joe Allen. So even if Joe Allen does stay, are you going to get 46 games out of him? We'll know. Probably the realistic scenario is at best you get 20-25. And how many starts you don't know. So yeah, I think that's definitely going to have to be an area as well that they look at, and probably a little bit more. I think Grimes and Fulton as a pair, it didn't really work for a long spell this season. It felt too samey, and there wasn't a lot of variety. I think if you need somebody who's a little bit more willing to carry the ball, a bit more athletic and stuff as well than Jay, because I think Jay's best work, a lot of it's done defensively, isn't it? But by his standards, I thought he had a not one of his best seasons this year. So yeah, I think you need something slightly different in there, which probably does make me think, that's an area that needs strengthening as well. And I feel like we're going to be saying this about every position, Steve. So
it does feel a bit like that, doesn't it? I mean, I think the way I'm looking at it more is that there's some positions where maybe a certain starter is needed, like goalkeeper and striker, which we will come on to. And then there might be others where, we're a little bit short, like we've mentioned centre-back there. I mean, if Darling and Cabango were first choice, that doesn't sound like the end of the world to me. But obviously it would be a case of if Wood was to go, you'd have to bring someone in, but there might not have to be a starter. But there's certainly a few positions, aren't there, where a starter has to come in, isn't it?
100%. Yeah, like I said, the goalkeeper's the main one in that regard, and for me, striker's the other one, which we'll come on to. But I think they're ones where they need to come in. They have to. Whereas the other ones, like you say, centre back, you've got players there that know the league, and there is a bit of cover. You're probably just talking about depth and more quality then. But yeah, certainly goalkeeper and striker are the ones that they have to come in and be probably first choice.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, we'll look at wide players in a bit, but I think we'll talk about striker now, because it's been a big problem, hasn't it? Goal scoring for Swansea this season. I think funny one, Jerry Yates' record in the first half of the year probably wasn't that bad, although he didn't, inspire anybody. But I mean, in the second half of the season, only a couple of goals. Certainly not a crowd favourite. Not really offered a lot. I mean, Jamal Lowe has played there a bit. I mean, Cullen at the start of the season was playing wide and then moved up there. I mean, I do like Cullen. I think he's, obviously the local lad, but I don't think playing up front on his own really suits him either. So, as you say, Swansea need a striker, don't they? I think Joel Perreault could frustrate at times last year, but sometimes he'd look a little bit lethargic. But, I mean, 20 goals though in the end, wasn't it? I mean, I think what we've seen is that we've really lacked that goal scorer this season. Yeah,
and that's the thing. You had Andre Ayew, who scored a brilliant number of goals under Steve Cooper. Joel Perreault scoring 20 plus, was it 24 and 20 in all competitions in his 2 seasons. Nobody got double figures this year, did they?
No.
Jamal Lowe and Yates got 9 each, was it? I think.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's you're never going to trouble the top 6 like that, really, are you? Unless you've got 7 or 8 players who are all contributing 8-9 goals, which Swansea simply don't have, because Grimes, Fulton, them sort of players, they never contribute massively with goals. At best, you get 1 or 2 from them, don't you? So, number 9's a major issue, and I think it was the episode you had Stuart James on a month or 2 ago, and he kind of summed it up perfectly in terms of Liam Cullen. He's exactly the kind of guy you need in the squad. Local lad, good pro, trains well, represents the club brilliantly, but you can't have him as your first choice striker. And I know that sounds really harsh to say, because there's a lot to like about him, but you need somebody who's going to get you more goals and who's more ruthless. And if he's your number 2 or your number 3, brilliant. That's exactly what you want. But yeah, I think that's an area that is probably the priority, I think. And I think Luke Williams said as much after the Millwall game, didn't he?
Yeah, it is. And I think what you said there with Cullen is right. I mean, it's squad player, great, exactly the type of player that you want, but it's never going to be a first choice striker if we want to be particularly successful at this level. I mean, as you say, it can be harsh at times, but that's football, isn't it? So I mean, but I think out wide there are 1 or 2 reasons to be positive at least now, because we've got Ronald, who has shown glimpses. He's definitely raw, but it has given us that outlet. I mean, we talked about Plaqueta. We don't know what will happen there, but Giannelli will come back. Govia seems to be quite highly rated, has played a couple of games at the end of the season as a substitute. I mean, I still think someone might come in there, but I mean, it's out wide. Swansea are in a healthier position than they have been for a long time, aren't they? Really?
Yeah, it's one of the positions where they are looking a little bit more comfortable. I think, like I say, Ronaldo's going to be if he stays fit, he plays every week probably next season. Giannelli the same, I would imagine. Just hopefully the injury's not impacted him too much, because it's going to take him time to get back to match sharpness and championship level. But you can see he had some quality about him, so it'd be brilliant to see him when he gets back on the pitch. Govea, like you say, he's really highly rated by the academy. He had a new deal early this year as well, didn't he? So he's probably going to be looking at a squad role now if he doesn't get a loan move. So yeah, it's quite healthy, and this probably comes back to Poeta. You know, is he maybe the fourth and final piece of the jigsaw? If he isn't, I think there's probably only one more player to come in that one of those wide positions, and they're probably quite happy with that. So thankfully, that's not one of the worst ones to solve, really, is it?
No, it's not. The only other position we haven't talked about is number 10. So obviously we've talked about Jamie Patterson. So the other player we haven't really talked about is Ollie Cooper. He's probably gone backwards over the last year or so, but over the last month has got himself into the team, hasn't done a bad job. And I was thinking, to be honest, Cooper might be in a position where he needs a bit of a loan spell elsewhere before that, because I mean, he needed to be playing, but he is back in now. So, I mean, he needs to try and step up and stake a claim for a regular space, doesn't he? Because, he had a solid start to his time, once Russell Martin got him in the side, but then lost his way a little bit, didn't he?
Yeah, again, and I think he's probably been one of those that has been a victim of the style changes and all the changes around him. Not a victim, but yeah, it's not been a good season for him. He's not been able to get into the team consistently enough, and when he has, there aren't that many performances where you go, oh, he was on it today, and that's not because he's been a lack of effort or anything else, but he's just not made the impact that you need from that type of attack-minded player. Whereas Jamie Patterson at least has made more of an impression consistently, and I think that's why he's been in the team even under Duff and even under Luke Williams. He's one of the few that has been consistent in that regard. So, yeah, I feel like it's a big summer for Ollie Cooper. He's going to have to be open for a good pre-season, trying to impress Luke Williams and prove that he's worth not just the squad place, but get me in your starting 11 more weeks than not, and try and have an impact, because it feels like there's a place up for grabs in that sort of attacking three, if you like, whether it's Grimes and another in midfield plus whoever plays further up, whether it's Patterson or Cooper. So yeah, it's a big season ahead for him, I think.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, he's not young anymore, is he? So he needs to try and force his way into the team on a regular basis, I would say. I mean, in terms of names, I mean, is there anyone in particular that springs to mind that you think could come in? I mean, one that springs to mind for me is Macaulay Langstaff at Notts County. It's an easy one, really, because obviously Luke Williams knows him well. I mean, it would be a gamble, I think, obviously, to take someone from two divisions below. And I mean, he isn't a typical player in terms of resale value. But, I mean, do you think someone like that, for example, might come in? Or have you got any other names in mind?
I understand why people have mentioned him and stuff as well, because let's be honest, I've spoken to Luke Williams about Notts County, but just in general, just as a football fan, not even as a journalist. And yeah, you listen to what he says about Macaulay Langstaff and what he did for that club and the way he played. And I've seen him at Notts County a couple of times covering Newport and Wrexham this season as well. And he's a very, very good player. But like you say, that's a massive jump to go from League Two to the Championship. But like you say, it's not like he's a raw 19-year-old where there's more risk. He's more established. So I personally would think that kind of limits the risk a little bit, where he'd be more ready for it. The obvious downside to that is then he's not as much of an asset as a Flynn Downs or a Joel Pirro that we've seen over recent years. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. You'd never be surprised if he did take a look back at his former club for potential signings. But, yeah, for me, I think that one of the keys this summer is going to be the loan market. You never want to rely on them. But when you're a club in the Championship and you can't be doing deals permanently all the time, it's a market that you have to utilise. And even if you just get 3 or 4 in, make sure they're 3 or 4 that can contribute. They don't have to be starting every week, but can they be good squad players that can play a run of 10 games if your first choice gets injured, or can they start the season and dip in and out if they're a young player? So yeah, for me, there's a lot going to hinge on the loan market as well this season. People often downplay it in terms of you don't want a squad full of loans, and it's true. You'd rather have all your own players under contract long term, but as we know, football, certainly below the Premier League, definitely doesn't work like that. So, yeah, they need to be a bit smarter there. I think that's where they could get 1 or 2 gems, ideally.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, I mean, you've got to be open to loans because, as you say, we don't live in this ideal world. But I think it would be good to try and maybe have 2 or 3 good loans as opposed to what we ended up with last year, which was 6. And then I think under Russell Martin, we did have 2 or 3, but a couple of them were basically there just making up the numbers. Whereas obviously under Steve Cooper, the loans were arguably our best players. Certainly some of them were. So there's a bit of a balance and act to find, isn't there? And I think obviously for a club like Swansea, there is a need, isn't there, as well, to try and find players that you can improve. sell on, because I mean, you look at the financial situation here now, it does feel as if the owners are, putting money in every month to make sure that, offset any losses. And if that was to continue over a long period of time in terms of the club just losing money, going to be in trouble with financial fair play as well. So it's important, isn't it, I think, to try and find players like what we've had with Downs and Pro, and being able to sell them on for a profit to make sure we don't have any issues, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's a really tough balance, because like you say, Steve Cooper brought those loan players in knowing that they were going to play every time they were fit. They were going to play, and they did. And even Ben Wilmot, players like him who isn't that sort of Premier League level player, but he still contributed massively as well. So whereas we just didn't have that last season, did we, aside from Carl Rushworth? So if sort of a player like him, like Freddie Woodman, obviously in both of his seasons at Swansea, he knew he was going to start every week, and that's why that Newcastle were willing to sanction a deal, in the same way that, if Brighton wanted assurance, if they're willing to let him go out on loan again to a championship club, well, they know he's going to play every week at Swansea, so they'd go, happy days, off you go and have a great season. So, yeah, it's just that balance of knowing what you're getting and what they're going to give you. So, but also, like you say, developing assets for a club in this situation, as we've seen with the accounts coming out recently, and the amount of money that's been put into the club over certainly over the last 12 months, 18 months, or even further back when Jake Silverstein arrived as well. So, yeah, there's got to be some assets in there as well. And hopefully Ronaldo, potentially he might fit that category. Nathan Wood, like you say, not to the same extent as he should have done, but still an asset nonetheless that will generate money. But beyond that, there's not too much. Off the top of my head, I can't think of too many more that might get good sums, unless you're looking at maybe a Sam Parker or a Philip Lisser. But again, they've in first team football, they haven't done anything yet, so that's going to take time and patience as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think from my point of view, we want to try and at least have one every year that you can sell on, really, to balance the books. And it doesn't, other than Nathan Wood, it doesn't feel like at this stage there is anybody. I mean, Ronaldo's maybe a possibility, isn't there, in 12 months if he's improved again and that type of thing. And as you say, the likes of Lisser and Parker, if they've had a full season of first team football under their belts, then I suppose you do never know then how they will get on, for example. But I mean, a loss of 18 million from my point of view did set alarm bells ringing, really. And we're quite, I know the board have taken a lot of stick for poor decisions, and it's difficult to really argue against it. But I have to say, really, now it could be worse, because if they're not putting that money in, we could easily be a red in. So there is that as well, and I just hope that mistakes are learned from it, because there have been quite a few, really, in recent years. But before we finish, one thing I wanted to touch on with you, Mitch, before we'll discuss the end of season awards as well, was this new TV deal. I mean, there's going to be a lot more games on TV next season. I mean, from my point of view, for the match-going fans, it's not really great at all. You're going to get a lot of games that are shifted by the looks of it to 12:30 on a Saturday. And I mean, crowds are going to drop further. And I think this is actually going to cause issues for a lot of clubs as well. I mean, let's be honest about it. Those Leeds, for example, don't go up. I mean, they'll be all right, because they'll still sell out every week anyway. But I mean, a lot of other clubs are going to be in a situation where, it'll be a lot cheaper to go down the pub type of thing to watch it, rather than paying to go to games. And that's not going to help clubs like Swansea either, from my point of view.
And that's the problem, isn't it? You look at you used the word disconnect earlier in the pod, and I think that applied to the Swans for long parts of the season. You saw it in the numbers in the crowd and the way they were dropping off. And you can imagine in this sort of new deal era, where if you're on the fence about going to a match and you're saying no now, well, you're definitely going to say no if it's on offer on a telly on a Tuesday night and you're in middle of December and you're in 18th or 19th, aren't you? You might not even want to watch it at home, but that's an all different debate. So it is an interesting one. And bearing in mind, we're talking about Swansea in the Championship here, so never mind sort of clubs in League One and League Two that have got much smaller fan bases. And there are clubs like Leeds who they've been on Sky a ridiculous number of times this season, but it's for a reason. It's because people know them and people watch them, and it gets the numbers up. So business model wise, I understand it from Sky, but and they've got an incredible fan base, so they'll be fine anyway. They'll sell out, whether in League One and everything as well. We've seen it in the past. So, but they're a unique case, aren't they? Like you say, in Swansea's case, it's very different. So yeah, I'm intrigued to see how it does work. In terms of distribution, does it help? But who knows, really? You just got to hope that there's enough of an appetite at the club to keep fans there anyway. And like you say, it's an issue that's often spoken about by the trust, and Andy Coleman, they're often asked about attendances and what can you do to keep fans on board and stuff as well. So I think Kieran Maguire covered it brilliantly in the podcast he did with the trust as well. If anybody hasn't heard that, it's well worth a listen. So yeah, we'll see on that one. I'd be really intrigued to see what it does for not just the club's finances, but for the bums on seats more, to put it bluntly.
Yeah, exactly. I do worry that long term, but you're going to get generations of people that become more accustomed to watching football on TV rather than going. And I think if that happens, then football in general is going to have a big problem. But I mean, that's probably a problem for another day. Now it'll take time for that to impact. But I mean, we'll end tonight's pod with a little discussion about end of season awards. Really, I know, Mitch, you've unlike when you were at Wales Online, you haven't been covering every game this year, so you might be slightly out of the loop with one or two of them. But I mean, player of the year wise, I mean, from my point of view, it's got to be Carl Rushworth. I mean, without him, we'd not have done as well, without a doubt. I mean, I don't think a huge amount of players have really excelled this year, but that would be my pick. I mean, who would you go for?
Yeah, I think that one's quite straightforward. It was Carl Rushworth all day long for me. You look in years gone by where you've had Joel Pirro scoring as many goals as he has, Matt Grimes, the consistency in what he does, which even by some still gets overlooked, which I think is crazy. But everyone's got an opinion; they're all entitled to it. Flynn Downs, you go further back, these sorts of players. There was often like different options of players, not just goal scorers, not just the goalkeeper. There was a centre mid. You could pick a variety of players. Whereas this year, I just think it was quite straightforward. It felt like there wasn't really a debate, and if you were making a debate, it felt like you were manufacturing one. So yeah, I'm with you on that, Stephen. I'm with the official choice as well. Yeah,
obviously that he did win the official one. I think the goal of the season officially was Josh Ginnelly for a wonderful run and then absolutely brilliant shot against Northampton in the cup way back in August. We're having a couple of connection issues here, so I think I'll just wrap this up now quite quickly. I mean, it won't come to a shock as anyone that the best game was the Cardiff game and the best moment is the Jamal Lowe goal against them. I mean, I think what says it all would be the other contenders for best moment would probably be Michael Duff getting sacked, which probably sums up the fact that this season hasn't been particularly enjoyable, really. But thanks as ever for joining us. It's not been the easiest of seasons. Hopefully myself and Matt and our guests like Mitch and Stu and Tom Coleman, of course, have provided you with a bit of insight and some enjoyment. We will take a break now, I think, during the off season. Obviously there won't be a huge amount to discuss regularly, but we will of course return at when we feel there's some important news. So that might be when a few signings have been made, maybe when the fixture lists have come out, or the new kit launch. Any time where we feel there's been a few stories that we can touch upon and it's worth us having a chat about and putting it out there, that's what we'll do. But what I would say to everyone is try and enjoy your summer before it all starts again in August, which it will. It'll all come around quite quick as it always does. And like I said, thank you very much for listening this season. It's it's not been brilliant at times, as I've said, but I mean, we wouldn't be doing anything else on our Saturdays, would we? So from myself and Mitch and, of course, Matt, who's been with us regularly this season, thank you for listening. Bye for now.